We're starting with a little stagecraft tonight, if you're noticing this. Yeah.
Well, now that the magical part of our evening is over, we can start with the chit-chat. So good evening, everybody. My name is Brandon Judkins, and I'm the Director of Programs with Indiana Humanities. On behalf of Beth and Krzysztof and all the amazing people at the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, along with Cassandra, James, and Elise, and all the folks at this awesome venue, and Lynn and David, and the great folks at Dance Kaleidoscope, welcome to tonight's program. This evening's conversation is part of this year's Clowes Conversation series, as well as Indiana Humanities INconversation series. I like to describe INconversation as our intimate glimpse behind the scenes with the thought leaders and creative minds making our world a little more interesting. And in shorthand, I always say it's our version of Inside the Actor's Studio, but maybe with our setup tonight, it's more appropriate. We'll call it Inside the Orchestra Pit. Before I say a few words about this amazing collection of panelists we have tonight, I want to let you know that it really is our desire that tonight be an intimate, engaging, interactive conversation. That means we want you guys to participate. We easily could have doubled or tripled the size of the number of people we allowed in tonight and still sold the event out. But it was important to everyone involved that we create an atmosphere where each of you felt like you had the opportunity to really interact with these folks. So we'll set aside at least 10 minutes towards the end where you guys can ask questions. There are microphones on either side. Please step up and make sure all of us can hear your question. So with that, tonight our moderator is Michael Toulouse. Michael's the program director with the Fine Arts Society of Indianapolis, now known as Classical Music Indianapolis.
Classical Music Indy, yes, thank you.
Classical Music Indy. With his work with Classical Music Indy and WFYI, Michael's been creating classical music programs here in Indianapolis for about 12 years and similar programs around the Midwest for the better part of 25. I was recently reading reviews of Michael's work, and I knew we had found the perfect moderator for the discussion when I read this short review. It said, Michael is someone with deep and broad knowledge of classical music and a warm, conversational, and gracious style.
And my wife, as you can see, is a wonderful writer. So.
To Michael's left is David Hochoy. David is in, I believe, his 23rd season as the artistic director of Dance Kaleidoscope. Now, David took an interesting path to dance, and as I understand it, David began his college career studying to be a doctor when, at the age of 20, he took his first dance class, an incredibly late age to begin a career as a dancer, but at that moment realized he had found his passion, committed himself to dance, and was shortly thereafter asked to join the Martha Graham Dance Company, where he became a soloist in 1982, a rehearsal director in 1986, and his accomplishments after that are far too numerous to list here, but thankfully we've been able to enjoy many of them here in this city with his almost 25 years with us. And to Michael's right, we have Krzysztof Urbanski. Krzysztof became the musical director of the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra in 2011 at the ripe old age of 28, making him the youngest musical director of any major symphony in America. He's been a sensation around the world since graduating from the Chopin Music Academy in 2007, the same year he won the Prague International Conducting Competition. Since that time, he's held conducting positions with symphonies from Los Angeles to London to Tokyo and too many places in between to list. And to give you a better sense of Krzysztof, I could kind of go through more accomplishments, but I thought I would just share this brief story I learned that I think gives some good insight into maybe how Krzysztof got here. And so for a second, I want to forget Krzysztof the conductor and talk about Krzysztof the cheesemaker. And so this is the story as it was told to me. Krzysztof is touring around Europe, Italy I believe, and finds this great cheese shop and finds this wonderful, sweet, delicate cheese that he falls in love with. And he asks the owner to ship as much of it as possible back to him, and the owner tells him that that's impossible. This cheese is far too delicate to ship. The only way to enjoy this cheese is to have it where it's made. And so Krzysztof says, okay, I'll learn to make cheese. And so that might be a silly story about a guy who wants to make cheese, but I think that someone's reaction when they're told something, no matter how trivial, that they want is impossible, their immediate decision is not to accept that, but to figure out how to make it possible. I think that's an interesting outlook on life, and maybe we'll hear more about cheese. So with that, Michael, Krzysztof, and David.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I was thinking about this earlier this evening, and it occurred to me that the weekend of June 13th and 14th, 2014, will be a weekend of firsts. The man on my left has never worked with the man on my right. That will be his first experience working in performance with him. The man on my right has never worked with dancers. The man on my right has also never given a performance in this facility, Clowes Memorial Hall, which you may associate with many fine performances by the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra and other ensembles in this state and in this city, of course. Krzysztof Urbanski comes to Indianapolis in the first week of June after yet another first. He will be conducting his first opera in the month of April, and we'll have a chance to talk about that tonight as well. But I think before we even begin with any of that, there's one more first that we need to talk about, and this goes all the way back to the year 1909, when Maurice Ravel was introduced to Michel Fokine, a rather temperamental Russian choreographer. This man spoke no French. Ravel did not speak any Russian. He knew some swear words, but that was about the extent of it. They were asked by Serge Diaghilev, the great impresario of the Ballet Russe in Paris, to create a new ballet. And the subject matter was from ancient Greece. Right away, off the bat, we had two different visions of what Greece was. Fokine was thinking of these urns and these very austere figures in almost abstract nature. Ravel was thinking of Watteau and the impressions that you'd have of classical Greece with flowing robes and these long beards. So somehow, over the course of 3 years, they came up with this masterpiece, which since then has gone into the orchestral repertoire. It's very rare these days for an orchestra to perform Daphnis and Chloé with dancers. And I think I'd like to make that our starting point and start with you, Krzysztof. When you, as a conductor, think about a piece of music, one of the first considerations is tempo. How is that affected when you're dealing with dancers? What adjustments do you have to make when it comes to matters of how fast you perform something?
Of course. So I think the only solution how to do it, as you said, I have no experience, so these are just my guesses. But I think that's why we met today, and I more or less explain what my vision would be. I would rather stick to all the tempi marked by Maurice Ravel because he was very particular in marking those metronome markings. So then, of course, I think as a conductor, because music in this particular piece is sometimes it's of course most important, but there are some passages when it's really accompanying dancers. So in these passages, I think the conductor has to be flexible and just to allow dancers feel free and to express themselves, I think. So it has to be a compromise, you know. I have actually no experience in it, so I'm even more excited about this production because then I think after the production I'm happy to answer your question with more detail.
Well, I'm going to ask you a few more questions tonight, but thank you. That gives me a clue of what not to touch on, I guess. But David, he did mention that flexibility and the concept of going with the tempo as marked. I should point out that this is not your first time working with a live orchestra, although it is kind of an exceptional event. You've done this with music of Rimsky-Korsakov before, right?
Yes, we've done it with quite a few instances. We've done Scheherazade, of which of course is by Rimsky-Korsakov, and on that same program we did the Rachmaninoff variations on a theme of Paganini, both with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and before that we did the planets, Holst's The Planets. But I'd like to tell the audience this wonderful story, may I?
Absolutely.
About tempo. You know, the thing that's interesting about tempo is that because the human body is capable of doing certain things in a certain way, and then past that, they are certainly not capable of doing it. We can make a lot of adjustments, but we can't make enormous adjustments. And so I'm going to tell you the story about Mario Vanzago. When he first came to the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, he commissioned Dance Kaleidoscope to do this piece by Milhaud called La Création du Monde, which is a wonderful score. It's very influenced by jazz. And I said, well, that's great, Mario. You know what? Just tell me what tempo you want to take this at. And so he sent me a CD and said, okay, all the tempos are very, very close to what I want. And so we went away and we choreographed the whole thing, and it was all ready to go. And a week before we were supposed to go on stage, somebody from the ISO came and said to me, Mario wants to know if that section, which is very fast in your recording, if he can take it very slowly. And so I said, well, why don't you ask Mario to come to my rehearsal so we can have a look at it? And he came to watch the rehearsal, and he said, you know, David, there's no way I can change the tempo because they were jumping up and down. So he couldn't have changed the tempo. But so we are governed by the tempo and what we can and can't do. So it's very important.
But that choice of recording, then, it sounds like was essential early in the process as you developed that choreography.
Yeah, the choice,
La
and unfortunately, you see, the thing is that the choice of the recording is very important in the process. And if Krzysztof was with me every single day, and you know, he could come to me and say, "Oh, by the way, David, you know, I'm listening to this recording, and in this section, I would really like to take it a lot faster or a lot slower." Then I can make adjustments. But because we see each other so late in the process that it's not possible to have that kind of collaboration, which is unfortunate. But you know, it's the times, you know.
But I would like to add that here with this particular piece, it's a little different because when we are talking, for instance, about Rite of Spring or the music written for dance that is very rhythmical, it's different. This music is very impressionistic. So here, tempo is, I would say, not that important as a call or mood. And with this, having this in mind that many of the passages in this score are very slow, you can actually adjust quite a lot. So I think, yes. I hope I'll be able to do it here when we start rehearsals. But Ravel wrote it very wisely, actually. Really, there are many passages when there is very often a moment of silence happen. And the moment of silence can last 1 second, 2, 3 seconds, depending on what is necessary for your choreography. So really, this gives you a lot of flexibility. This score gives the conductor, I think, a lot of flexibility in tempo.
What recording have you chosen as the model?
As I said, for me, the model would be as close as to Ravel original markings. Like, for instance, the piece opens. Ravel describes it very precisely with a long quarter note equals 48 beats per minute. And I did find one recording when conductors approach, who was Pierre Boulez recording with Berliner Philharmoniker, when most of the tempi are almost exact as written in the score. So I'm not planning to change it dramatically. As I said, I have exactly the same goals, just to present Ravel's music in the simplest possible way.
I'd like to talk for a minute, David, about the scale of the production. We'll talk about the orchestra and the singers in a moment and for a real idea of the scale, but this involves a larger company for you, too. How many dancers will you be working with?
Well, right now, Dance Kaleidoscope has 12 dancers, and we're planning on hiring 2 more, so we are on 14. We don't really have, I would love to hire 20 more dancers, but we don't have the money to hire 20 more dancers. And and actually, I'm really happy that you all were able to see the stage, because you know the scale of the production really has a lot to do with how we're going to stage it. So the the chorus is 160 people strong. So the orchestra is going to be here, and actually it will go into the extended pit, which grows to about row E. Yes, where that gentleman is. And so Krzysztof will be right where that gentleman is.
Would you mind waving one more time, sir, and wave a little higher?
That's gonna be
That is row
Krzysztof.
E. Our orchestra will be out there. Thank you so much. Yep.
And then the choir will be backstage here on risers, right where that floor panel is. So the dancers will have this much room in front of the space. And so we have to create all of this scale in this big hall. And I plan to do it with a lot of the help of projections. Because we really don't have a lot of money to buy big, complicated sets. And I don't think they're needed very much anyway. And I like to do things that are very imaginative. That's the way I did the planets. And so that's the way it's going to be done. And I'll just tell you what my vision for the opening is. I just told this to Krzysztof. And that is that, and actually nobody knows this. You guys are going to be the first ones to hear it. I'm going to start this piece with just the orchestra and the choir back there on a bare stage. They'll be just like this, no wings. And so the music is going to start on a bare stage, and then slowly, because the opening, I would say 5 minutes is very, very slow. As the voices come in, the wings will come in one by one, and then there'll be a scrim that comes down here, and the lights will dim, and then we will start the projection, so that we will be creating the piece in front of you as the whole thing evolves. So it's a piece that's created with the music and for the stage.
As a way of touching on the plot here briefly, I'd like to ask what you intend, or what's your vision for those projections? What will the audience see on those?
Because the music is very impressionistic, I think it's a beautiful example of Impressionism at its height. I want to use the work of impressionistic painters like Van Gogh and Matisse, and their scenes, so that these impressionistic paintings will set the scene for you.
All right, and the story of a young shepherd and shepherdess who fall in love. The shepherdess is abducted by pirates, so we have the characters of the pirates introduced in the music here, and there's a wonderful reunion at the end with a general dance, and I think a scene you're looking forward to, David. You said the orgy.
The orgy. It's called the Bacchanal, and I think, to me, it's very, what can I say? It's very orgiastic in that Ravel builds this to an incredible climax. He uses a lot of tension in the music, and he builds it and builds it and builds it and builds it in a wonderful, wonderful way. And it really, literally explodes at the end. And so I'm hoping that we can give you all some sort of spectacle that will match the music at the end.
Now, Krzysztof, you are the maestro. You saw the man waving out there. You see how much space will be taken up. Do you imagine that you will be taking up every inch of this space with your orchestra on June 13th and 14th?
Yes, I think because this is enormous size orchestra. It's quadruple woodwinds, big brass section, then 2 harps, celesta, and very big string section, and a lot of percussion instruments, and also some offstage instruments. So the size of the score is just enormous.
And quadruple woodwinds, for people unfamiliar with this, means you have 4 oboes,
Yes.
4 clarinets, 4 flutes, 4 bassoons.
Yes,
Am I missing some? We have English horn too, or do we?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have, for instance, in flute section, we have 4 flutists, but they perform on flute piccolo. Actually, for this piece, 4 of them. There are 2 piccolo flutes required. There are 3 flutes required, and there is also alto flute, which is a very rare instrument, very occasionally used. But there is a big section when Daphnis is. There is a story about Pan and Syrinx, and this is a very extended flute solo. So actually the flute solo just to extend the range of the instrument, Ravel did it by using smaller piccolo the flute and also the larger alto flute. So then the scale of instrument is very big, and
but then the members of the orchestra, those members in that woodwind section, have to play as if they're one instrument then.
Exactly, and then there is one passage which I imagine is very tricky. I have never done the piece, but it looks like in the score when there is one very big scale from really top possible note to the very low alto flute note, which is played by 4 people, and they just need to play it as one person. So, and the last note of flute piccolo is where the first flute started. The first goes to second, and the second to alto. And in many passages, it really has to sound like one person playing on pan flute.
Now, we mentioned this vast orchestra and all the space that it will take up. We mentioned in passing the presence of 160 singers in a choir. They'll be at the back of the stage. How do you conduct these people?
No, I think there will be a screen hanging here somewhere so they could see me, because the problem is that there will be dancers between the choir and me. So just to have a visual contact, we'll need to have some screens, some monitors on backstage, because I have not decided, as you know, I have never performed in this hall. So for those off-stage instruments, there is a pirate scene, and pirates, they are getting closer and closer. So there is a horn ring. At the beginning, it starts very far away, then it's getting closer, and then it's in the orchestra, and this is when the pirates are starting their dance. And I don't know where we're gonna place those off-stage instruments, because they simply might not fit on stage or behind the stage because of so many people. So maybe we'll place them in the lobby. So anywhere we will need to have monitors to have a contact with those musicians, and probably we'll have to use the same for my communication with the choir. And choir, this is actually a very unique way of scoring. It shows Ravel's mastery of orchestration, because it's very unique way of using human voice. In this score, it is part of an orchestra. It's really because there is no text. So they either sing with open mouth, but only on, or with, sometimes for special effect, they're murmuring with in Italian it's called a bocca chiusa, or murmuring, so that they close their mouth, and they make these charming imitations of nymphs, and creating a very special color, very special mood for this story. So it's really unique orchestration.
There are decisions that a person makes when placing a choir, and in other situations you've had choirs in separate places on stage. What are the hazards there? What can happen when you have your singers spread out?
First of all, for singers, it's much more difficult to sing when they're far away. So it's just simply it might be an ensemble problem when part of the choir is in one part of the stage, not hearing the second part. So it might be just difficult for them. But also, once I remember I had a concert in Portugal when I performed the piece where I've decided to split the choir and place them completely off stage, very, very far away from the orchestra. And there is a problem with intonation, because they don't hear the orchestra and they don't hear each other. So I wanted to have this surround effect of music coming from all possible direction. But for the singers, it was really, really difficult, to maintain the right pitch of the voice. So they were not very happy with my decision.
Oh. That's a risk you have to take, I suppose.
Yes, of course. And it is possible, just it requires enormous effort to make this extra effects.
I want to talk for a moment about, tie in your experience as a composer. I mean, as someone who has written music and has had to make these sorts of decisions, to what extent did Ravel, finally finishing this piece in 1912, to what extent, from the very start, did he limit himself by choosing or creating this orchestration with the calling for all these performance forces? As we said before, this is rarely performed with dancers. Did he almost guarantee that the fate of Daphnis and Chloé would be this because of this orchestration? And what do you think of that decision on his part?
I mean, it is a real challenge just to collect all the forces needed for it. Well, I forgot to say, we forget about the wind machine, which is also a part of the
The
orchestra.
wind machine, yes, right.
Yes.
And having worked with Strauss so much this year, he's already
Yes,
had some
2 weeks
experience
ago,
with that. Yeah.
we were performing a Alpine Symphony, where for the first time in my life, I've seen a real wind machine on stage, really. So, so these are enormous forces, and obviously, you know, at that time, Diaghilev gave him probably unlimited freedom in deciding about the number of instruments and everything. But you know, right now, this is why the piece is so readily performed, because it really involves so many artists on stage, and it's really complicated. So I couldn't be happier actually that it is possible in Indianapolis, which is so great.
Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely true. We mentioned some of these technical challenges. There's one thing that may not, that our audience tonight and perhaps the audience on the 13th and 14th of June may not realize, and that is when you're choreographing in this space for these performance forces arrayed, as we've said, you can't have what's known as a crossover. Would you explain that to me, and what does that mean for your dancers?
Yeah, a crossover is basically that. It's a crossover. It's a way for the dancers to go from one side of the stage to the other side of the stage without being seen by the audience. And usually it happens behind the furthest scrim in the theater. Well, unfortunately, there's not going to be any room for them to cross over this time, so I'm going to have to choreograph it with no crossovers. And it's not so difficult as long as I know in advance that there's not going to be any crossovers.
Who exited stage right, and
they have to come back on exactly where they came off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to have to run outside and run around.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I don't. We probably don't have time to go through your entire distinguished career here, but I want to know if you can call back in your memory to the first time you made the transition from performing with recordings to performing with a real orchestra, and what sort of feelings were going through your mind at that point?
Well, I can tell you, I went through a lot. For 10 years, Dance Kaleidoscope, we were the artists in residence at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And so we spent all summer at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and the people who were playing live music there with us, they were called the Terra Nova Consort. And they were early music musicians. They are specialized in early music, and they were rather demanding. Because they were like, no, David, this has to be this tempo. So those first few years, I mean, it was a very good experience for me, because I certainly had to bow to the wishes of these musicians, because there was, you know, they were the ones who were making the music happen. And so, it was a very good, what can I say? It was a very good training for me, Michael.
And you must have had times where you really had that one tempo in mind, but in performance, for whatever reason, it changed.
They just couldn't do it, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I would have to tell you, I'll tell you also that the most difficult music that I've ever choreographed in my life was, we once did a suite of medieval music. I don't know if Krzysztof has ever conducted medieval music, but we once did a suite of medieval music, which was so difficult because counting it was almost impossible, because things were in 17s and 5s and 9s and 24, and you know, you could just not make head nor tail of it. And actually, I had to ask the musicians to come in and help me count it, because it was just, I felt like Nijinsky in Rite of Spring, because he couldn't count the music either, and he had to get Marie Rambert to come and help him count.
I want to mention this, just since you mentioned Rite of Spring, that the Ballet Russe of Serge Diaghilev gave the first performance of Ravel's Daphnis and Chloé, and it came at such a crucial moment in the history of that company, after Petrushka, you know, one of Stravinsky's masterpieces, and before the Rite of Spring. So this is a company that was making incredible innovations in the art of ballet, and this was at the very moment that lightning was striking, and striking over and over again. Are those the sorts of things that go through your mind as you look at this music, as you look at that score? Or is it vastly different from Stravinsky? Is it hard to imagine these two composers having worked with the same ballet company?
You know, first I think we have to realize how different first three ballets written on Stravinsky are. So from Firebird to Rite of Spring, there are miles in between because this is just music written by a different composer. Firebird is a little impressionistic. There are some passages when I think he actually, some passages he was trying to imitate Debussy and Ravel, while Petrushka is completely different, and the Rite of Spring opens just a completely new chapter in the history of music. So, so having this in mind, you know, this is again something different than Stravinsky. So for the audiences in Paris, listening to all this new and shocking music written, what kind of, I'm trying to imagine what kind of shock it must have been for them, you know, to come to the performance and then just a few months later they are doing another masterpiece, and wow, it must have been an amazing experience listening to this.
David, one question for you, veering back and forth. When I have these two together, it's just hard for me to resist this impulse. There's a scene in this ballet that requires the use of weapons, but you don't go there in the current parlance. What choice do you make to address that, or what are you doing instead?
Well, I'm going to steal from myself. Martha Graham always used to tell me, she used to say to us, the dancers, I'm a thief, but I only steal from the best. Frequently she would steal from herself. She would steal pieces from one ballet to another ballet. And so when I was listening to the music of the Pirates, it's very savage music. I don't know if Krzysztof agrees with me or not, but it's very savage music, and it's wonderful and bold. And so I was thinking I should really use this section that I've done from the Rite of Spring, where the men come in twirling ropes, and they almost look like scimitars in the air, and then they're very, very threatening. And because I knew that I want to have a very fierce male dance there, because you know they in the story, these pirates or these brigands, they capture poor Chloé and they abduct her and take her away, and it's the god Pan who comes and rescues her. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use these ropes because, as I told Michael, to use real weapons on stage is very, very dangerous because people can get hurt very easily by them. So we don't want that to happen.
And all the rehearsal too would be very dangerous every stage. So this is something completely off topic. We're going to open the floor to questions in just a moment, but I can't have you on stage without asking you this question. A composer who has factored very importantly in your career recently passed away, Wojciech Kilar. This is a man responsible for many film scores. If you saw Francis Ford Coppola's telling of Dracula, for example, that's one project that he worked on. But Kilar has written some very innovative orchestral music, too, that the Indianapolis Symphony has played. The Indianapolis Symphony has commissioned music from Kilar, too. Had you seen this coming, or what sort of experiences have you had with him in recent years?
So I like some of Wojciech Kilar's music very much, and I was very happy when I could present this music to Indianapolis audience, because most of these pieces were, even by musicians, like completely unknown. You know, Kilar, although he wrote some scores for Hollywood productions, except for this, his music is barely known outside Poland. And it's really amazing. And whenever I bring those pieces, they are always so well received. Like before I came to Indianapolis 2 weeks ago, I had a concert with Los Angeles Philharmonic where we performed Krzesany, probably his greatest symphonic poem. And both orchestra and the audience, everyone was I mean, it was so well received. So, I'm just happy to present this music wherever possible. So after performing 2 of pieces by Wojciech Kilar, we came with the idea of commissioning the piece, but unfortunately the sad news were that Wojciech Kilar did not finish the piece. So our premiere performance was scheduled for this very month. Yeah, it was supposed to be performed at the end of February on our concert, so instead we are performing Krzesany, the piece that we have performed 2 years ago. So we've decided to repeat the piece just to honor the composer who was kind enough to write a piece especially for Indianapolis Symphony.
Right. Well, someone had told me that they would warn me when it was time to open the floor, and I think we've finished our portion, so I'd like to give the audience a chance now, if we don't mind. I think I've got someone out there with a question that hopefully I'm not catching our technical folks by surprise. It would be great. The question is, who decided on embarking on this collaboration? How did it come about?
Did you decide it?
Well, it's actually that gentleman sitting right there, Zach French, had a lot to do with it because last year, Dance Kaleidoscope, we did a wonderful educational program with the ISO. We did 15 performances of it, and he had asked me to give him a list of classical things that we do for possible collaborations in the future. And so I had put down all of the things that we have done. And then I sort of like, just as an afternote, I thought, okay, because I was thinking about doing Daphnis and Chloé anyway in our season. I just put down Daphnis and Chloé. And of course, Zach loves Daphnis and Chloé. I think you did your master's thesis on it, right? So he was like, he all of a sudden sat up and said, wow, this is great, let's do it. And I said, okay. That's how it came about. We started talking and planning.
Yeah, and I remember when we were planning season 13-14, it was some years ago, he came with the idea to do it, and I love the idea, so yeah, I'm very excited that it's going to happen. And it was Zach's idea to perform such a piece, such a great scale piece, such a masterpiece here in Indianapolis. So it's amazing that we're together now. It is really so fortunate.
Yeah, and it's very unusual. It's because it isn't done very often. Because in the dance world, the last time I saw it was in 1972, I think, 1974, when the New York City Ballet did a Ravel festival. So thank you, Zach, for...
Zach French, artistic administrator of the Indianapolis Symphony. So, good. A question? If you don't mind, I'll repeat these questions because we're being recorded tonight. What are the challenges of having the chorus so far back on the stage?
It's difficult for me to imagine this situation, but I think that the problem might be that I will not hear them very well. So for me, it will be very difficult to judge the balance between the orchestra and the chorus. So that is why we need many rehearsals before, and I probably would need to ask assistant conductor to conduct it, and I would need to go to double check if the chorus and orchestra is equally audible in every part of the audience. And this might be quite a challenge, because even when we set the balance there, it doesn't necessarily need to sound like this when I'm standing during performance. So I think it might be difficult, really, because normally, even in the orchestra, when the chorus is on the back of the orchestra, you have even in Hilbert Circle, you have a totally different sound that comes to the audience. Like, for instance, when I conduct, I hear orchestra 3 times stronger than the chorus, which is on the back. So that is why, like, whenever I do actually every week I'm conducting, I'm spending quite a lot of time in the audience, making sure that the sound that goes there, the balance is really good. But when there is a choral piece, I spend even more time in different places of the concert hall, double checking that the balance is right. Because in the choral piece, here it's different slightly, because as I said, Ravel used the human voice very as a part of the orchestra. But when there is a choral piece with a text, then text becomes very important. And for me, it's very, very important to make sure that everyone can understand what the chorus is singing about. So, and this is quite a challenge. I remember my last performance of Verdi Requiem here with Indianapolis Symphony Choir and the ISO. We did in October, and orchestra said, "Oh my God, Chris, we really cannot play softer." It is, I mean, really, whenever orchestra had fortissimo passage, which normally they play loud, not necessarily when I'm conducting, because I don't like hear it here, but circular when the orchestra plays too loud. But so normally they play always a little less when I'm conducting. This is what they told me. But with this Verdi Requiem, they literally played piano, very soft piano, when it was supposed to be forte. Otherwise, I could not hear the choir at all in some of the loud passages when everyone is so it's always a challenge to work with, you know, such a big group of people when they are so far away from each other, and here it will be even more difficult. So
with the choir at an even further remove from the orchestra. Yeah. So a challenge. Yes. The question is, how many times will the orchestra and dancers be able to rehearse together here?
Yes, so I think we have a precise rehearsal schedule already set, and with everyone on stage, we'll have two-hour rehearsals that require also 20 minutes. So we'll probably be able to do 2, maybe maximum 3 run-throughs of the piece. That is why each of the sections needs to work individually. I'll have a separate rehearsal with the choir. I'll have a separate rehearsals with the orchestra, and but all together with the choir and dancers, it will be 2 evenings. So it will be Wednesday and Thursday and Friday is a premiere.
Yes. The question is, how much time will Krzysztof and David spend on their own, solo, in their own individual preparation? David, maybe I'll start with you.
Thousands of hours. The way I work is that I usually listen to the music so many times that it gets inside of me, and I know it inside and out, backwards and forwards. So I will spend many, 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 many hours listening to it. No, I do not. I don't write things down at all. And as a matter of fact, I think for me, because I'm creating, as I was telling Krzysztof, what is so interesting is that when I go into the studio, I have an idea of what I want, kind of, but I don't have any idea of how it's going to come out until I get into the studio and start working with the dancers. So for me, it's really best to have kind of a subconscious feeling about the music, because what really comes out when I choreograph is my relationship to the music. And for that, I have to have a kind of a very subconscious, stream of conscious reaction as I am working. And it's best not to have any preconceived notions of how I'm going to do this.
And Krzysztof? For an amount of hours of preparation, can you?
I mean, it's for me really, I cannot answer the question because I simply don't know. As much as I studied the score until now, it is very complicated, not only because of the number of instruments, because for instance in some of the Shostakovich symphonies, the number of players is the same, but the way of scoring is totally different, because for instance, everyone is playing the same. Then you don't have to read every single line, you just read one and you see that everyone is playing same thing. But here, I'm opening it on a random page at the moment, like, oh gosh, it's such a mess. Like everyone playing something different, and you really have no idea how it's going to sound until you really read it on the piano, the way how I study the scores, line by line, and imagine I'll put together winds, they'll add brass and everything else, and then a certain color will appear, because this is a phenomenon actually of Ravel's orchestration, that like everyone playing something different, but at the end you have this impressionistic color. So it's going to be quite a challenge, I think.
I want to just throw in something here. When David mentioned his process of getting to know a piece of music and having it subconsciously in his mind, it called to mind what someone told me from the orchestra when they explained how you first came to know this music. Would you describe how you first came to hear Daphnis and Chloé and how you got to know it?
It was actually an accident. I remember, I I unfortunately in my family there are no musicians, so there was no one to introduce me to classical music when I was young. And I remember I started my musical education when I was 12, and I just started falling in love with it, and I was starting discovering different things. And one of the pieces that, as a person who is interested in classical music and trying to just discover it, was Ravel's Bolero. So I bought myself a stereo cassette that includes Bolero. I did not care what was else on the recording. I think it was something, but also some mysterious piece. I have no idea what it was. And as with stereo cassette, you always have to rewind it. And I was rewinding to the beginning of side A to listen to Bolero. But sometimes, being in different rooms, it happens that it go over. And this magical music started. I had no idea what it is, but it was true magic. It was just not music. I mean, for me, in my perception of music, of a person who grew up on Michael Jackson and New Kids on the Block was different. And, at that time, I was in love with Mozart music because this is actually the very good first step into classical music. And Bolero was, for me, easy to digest. This was something completely new. I have never heard something like this. I remember it was second orchestral suite from Daphnis and Chloé, which in ballet is the third part. So all those colors, I was trying to imagine what instruments are playing it. I have very little knowledge about instruments, about orchestra at that time. And I said, oh my God, it sounds like synthesizer, really. It sounds like electronic music because of the all the orchestral skills of Ravel. I mean, this was just amazing. And this sound, I said, what is it? I think, is it human voice there somewhere blended with this orchestra? And it really is. So for me, it was such a... Then I, of course, not remind, but I always fast forward Bolero to go to this magical Daphnis and Chloé.
Thank you for indulging me on that. I just the idea of this young maestro listening to cassette tapes makes me feel not so old anymore.
Actually,
right.
You know what? I want to tell Krzysztof something. That exactly is how I started listening to Daphnis and Chloé, because when I was a teenager and I was going to college, one of my friends said, "You've got to listen to this," and so we would play it almost every single day because. The suite number 2, which is the beginning of the third movement, to me, it's the height of Impressionism. You'll hear all of these different instruments of the orchestra, and Ravel creates a kind of an awakening of nature. You hear nature sounds and almost feel the sun rising. It's really incredible, incredible.
The question is, what CD, whose recording would you recommend, Krzysztof, for the audience to listen to?
Oh, it's very difficult to answer the question simply because I do not know so many recordings of this piece. So the one I found very, very beautiful and actually very, very simple in interpretation is the one I said before. This is a Pierre Boulez with Berliner Philharmoniker. And as I said, most of the tempi and everything, it just shows how much respect Pierre Boulez must have to Maurice Ravel. And because he's not changing anything, he's doing everything in the simplest possible way, which I, like most of the time when I'm conducting, I have exactly the same approach to music, because for me, just respect to the composer is one of the most important virtues of a performer. So I would recommend probably that one, but I'm sure you can find a number of really great recordings.
Yes. That is such a good question. And just briefly, David will be performing a lot of repertoire between now and June, including dancing to country music and another performance as well. So how do you have Ravel in the back of your mind and introduce it to the dancers?
The dancers, I don't have to introduce it to the dancers. The dancers have enough on their plate dealing with what it is they're dealing right now at the moment. I'm the one that has to do the work on the Ravel, and I'm good enough at multitasking that I can listen to, get it all in at once. Because, it's the interesting thing about artists is that, and I'm sure Krzysztof can speak to this, is that once we finish a project, we move on to the next thing. So I did a lot of listening for the Country and Western show. But I've chosen most of my songs now, so I'm sort of going into Ravel now because I have to. The dancers will not do it until May the 4th. May the 7th, I think, because we have performances May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and they have 2 days off, and then we hit the ground running.
Did Sherry have a question? Oh. Okay. The question for David is, will he draw on previous choreographers' visions of Daphnis and Chloé?
It really helps for me to look at other choreographic visions of it, but it only as a guide to see what they did. I don't usually copy anybody's choreography. And I was trying to explain to Krzysztof also that what's interesting with whenever I do a piece that's based on a narrative is that it's always a take on the narrative, because I always try to interpret the story in a very fresh way that will resonate with a contemporary audience, because you people are not the audience that Ravel wrote this for in 1912. So what you are experiencing today in the 21st century is very, very different. And so I have to make it vibrant and saying something to you, the audience, that lives today.
Yes.
No, never. This is my first time when I'm going to conduct Daphnis and Chloé.
This seems like a good time to wrap up our conversation tonight. Everyone, let's hear it for our panelists. And just 2 quick announcements before we let you go. I think that you guys received survey cards when you walked in. If you have the opportunity to fill those out, we would love to know what you think on your way out. And I was also told to tell you tickets are on sale at Ticketmaster. Tell your friends. Thank you, everybody.